Welcome everybody. My name is Claire Stubbs and I'm a counselling psychologist working for Boingboing, and today we're going to be thinking about school avoidance and the connection with anxiety. For those of you who don't know about Boingboing, so at Boingboing we're a community interest company, so obviously that means that our focus is on the interest of the community, and our passion and our focus is around resilience. So, and we're particularly interested in the most disadvantaged individuals and or communities, and looking at what supports our understanding in terms of being able to promote people's resilience. So then taking that information from the research and then transforming it into practice. So we're going to be thinking about that in relation to school avoidance and anxiety today. So obviously make sure you're as comfortable as you can. You can stop the video at any time, which is the benefit of being in an online training. There is a little quiz at the beginning, so make sure that you have a pen and paper handy as well, so you can have a go at engaging with that as well, and seeing how you get on. So, okay. And of course, if you have any questions in relation to this particular video, you can always email me, and my email address is claire@boingboing.org.uk. So let's get started. Okay, so like I said, we're going to do a little quiz now. So I'm going to read through the questions and then just note down whether you think the answer is true or false. So the first one is, school refusal is more common in boys than in girls. Question 2. The amygdala is the alarm system in the brain that sets off anxiety in the body. So the amygdala is the alarm system in the brain that sets off anxiety in the body. Question 3. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is pumped into the body when we get anxious. So cortisol, the stress hormone, is pumped into the body when we get anxious. True or false? Question 4. There are 3 types of response to anxiety: fight, which is anger; flight, run and avoid; or freeze, shut down and disconnect. When we are anxious, question 5, when we are anxious, we cannot hear or see things as they really are. Question 6, the frontal lobes, the logical part of the brain, is shut down by the amygdala when we get anxious. Question 7, 1 in 7 young people under the 18 will suffer from anxiety at some point. Breathing deeply and slowly sends a message from your body to your brain that all is well and there's no cause for alarm. Question 9. Oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical, is released into the body when we breathe deeply, and this is like medicine for the cortisol. And question 10, if you are making every attempt to get your child to school as a parent, then you're not breaking the law. True or false? So question 1 then, which was school refusal is more common in boys. Actually, there's no evidence to suggest a real difference in gender, but school avoidance can affect 2 to 5% of children school age and is more prominent between the ages of 5 and 6 and also 10 and 11. And it's important to note as well that up to 80% of children who want to avoid going to school are actually experiencing some form of anxiety. I think that's really important in thinking about, particularly if children go into more of a fight response, we might be mistaken for feeling it's a behavioural issue rather than actually that there's something else going on underneath that that could be connected to an anxiety. Question 2. So the amygdala is the alarm system in the brain that sets off anxiety in the body. That's true, and we will be talking a little bit about the brain and anxiety as part of this workshop. Question 3. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is pumped into the body when we get anxious. Yep, absolutely. Cortisol serves, many purposes in the body in terms of protecting us. So, for example, if we need to run because we're anxious, so what cortisol does is have like an anti-inflammatory effect. So if you're running and you're running away from someone, then if you hurt yourself, your ankle won't swell in order to enable you to keep running. It's quite incredible, really, isn't it? The body is amazing, and cortisol helps provide that. Question 4, there are 3 types of response to anxiety. So that's the fight response, where we get angry and want to attack. The flight response, which is running and avoiding, or a complete freeze, which is where we completely shut down and disconnect. And that's true. They are the 3 different responses, and we'll be thinking about them throughout the presentation. And the thing about those different responses as well is we don't necessarily know how we're going to respond, and actually, people can end up responding, very differently when they're under stress. Question 5. So when we are anxious, we cannot hear or see things as they really are. That's very true. So because in the brain, the logical, rational part of our brain actually shuts down when we're anxious. So the amygdala, remember the alarm system in the brain that sets anxiety off in the body, it actually stops the logical, rational part of the brain from working. And also our auditory functions are impacted. And furthermore, then, if people have also gone through trauma, that will also impact on their capacity to hear things as they are. So we tend to hear things how they were, or see things how they were, rather than as they are. So, but it's really about the impact of the brain and the part that that's playing in terms of those auditory and visual functions as well. Question 6, the frontal lobes, so the logical part of the brain, gets shut down by the amygdala when we are anxious. So I've just answered that for you. So that's true. 1 in 7 young people under the age will suffer from anxiety. Yes, that's true too. And I mentioned earlier that up to 80% of children who don't want to go to school are actually experiencing some form of anxiety. So that's a really significant amount. Question 8. So breathing deeply and slowly sends a message from your body to your brain that all is well and there's no cause for alarm. Yes, breathing is very powerful, and I highly recommend it in terms of supporting children to calm down initially if they're anxious. So, just a very simple breathing in for 3 seconds, holding it for 3, and then breathing out for 3 seconds, as we in question 9. So what that does is it releases oxytocin into the system, which is the medicine for cortisol, and then that begins to help the frontal lobe turn back on, and does, like it says, send a message to the system that all is well. So breathing is deep breathing is incredibly powerful. And so question 9, yes, oxytocin, the bonding chemical, is released into the body when we breathe deeply, and this is medicine for cortisol, absolutely. And then number 10, if you're making every attempt to get your child to school, then you're not breaking the law, and this is true. So how are we thinking about school avoidance then, and thinking about what is the anxiety? So, I mean, in 1941, it was actually, it was called school phobia. So how we're thinking about it is, of course, there are those young people out there who might avoid, going to school because they simply don't want to. And I guess even then, isn't it, there's something that's going on for that child or young person, and actually shouldn't be overlooked. And also, the population of children and young people that we're thinking about in this presentation is those, those young people or children that might fall into that 80% who actually it's really quite distressing, to go to school. And that may be because something has happened at school, that there's a particular threat in some way, and a threat can be something like, I don't feel good enough at school. I don't feel like I'm achieving enough, because obviously then that can trigger all those challenging and painful beliefs. So it can feel safer to not go. Or it may be that something has happened at school with someone else or with a teacher perhaps, that's been particularly stressful. I've worked with children where they haven't been able to go to the toilet in a lesson because it hasn't felt appropriate by the teacher, and then actually that's been quite traumatic. And then, the fear is about that happening again. Something like that can, really result in an anxiety about a particular lesson. So, and then, what we're thinking about here is there can also be separation anxiety. If for whatever reason the child or young person feels fearful about leaving home or leaving mum, or leaving dad, whoever the carer is, and what it means for them to separate depending on their history and their experiences. And also, there's also a sort of more generalised anxiety, which is much more of an excessive worry that can then escalate, and the child or young person is drawing certain conclusions about what might happen if they're going to school. Obviously, really aware of the current context that we're in, where actually things really changed last year in 2020, for example, with COVID-19. And actually, both, isn't it? On the one hand, children are being taken out of school or they're being schooled at home. So then they're not having to necessarily face this anxiety that they might be experiencing around school. But then the problem with that is as well, is if they're out of school for too long, then obviously that anxiety can build up and then become more problematic, as well as then you've got the new restrictions in place that is, like I say, new and daunting, and uncertain for children, and they might not be sure about, what they need to do and, how to tackle that. And again, that can evoke a different anxiety too. So we'll be thinking a bit about these things as we go along. So then, so thinking about what can we do to support children and young people, and just pause the video for a second and just think about what might you have needed when you've been anxious, what might support your resilience. And like I say, just take a moment to just pause and think about that. So welcome back. So if you've had a think about that, often people share, isn't it, that they want someone to just really acknowledge their feelings, really validate that. And there's a technique that we'll be talking about from Dan Siegel, who's a neuroscientist, and then thinking about the impacts on the brain, of actually it's really important that we do connect with people's feelings, as well as then obviously afterwards giving that logical, rational information. But it's important first that we do really connect with the emotion. You might have had experiences, isn't it, where you've been in a conflict with a partner or something, and the partner is quick to, kind of say they get how you feel and then defend themselves or give an alternative argument. And actually the danger is that it can end up feeling dismissive if we're not with the emotion long enough. Actually I know that, I just need someone to just sit alongside me, kind of just telling me that I'm okay in how I'm feeling, and just, it will pass. It is obviously where you're, how you're feeling right now, but you're not going to feel like this forever. And so we'll think a bit more anyway about how we can support children and young people, but also it's important to think about what you might have needed at a time when you felt anxiety. So we're going to think for a minute about anxiety and the brain. So as you can see there, where the chimp is, so he's sitting nicely in the limbic system in the brain, and this is where we hold all our emotions, and this is where we process our emotions in the brain. So Professor Stephen Peters has designed this chimp metaphor as a way of kind of suggesting, or like I say, kind of illustrating, that's a better word, how our emotional brain is like a chimp, because actually chimps only have chimps are all emotional brain. And then he, very nice, it's really applicable for adults and children. There's a workbook for children that you can use as well if you're interested in using this metaphor, and then thinking about how the chimp can take over. And if you think as well, like children are all emotional brain until, sort of the age of, up till about 10 really, when their frontal lobes, and I talked about this in the quiz, so the frontal lobes are the logical, rational decision-making part of the brain. So, but like I say, these aren't really being fully developed until that sort of 10, 11 age. So therefore, children are all emotional brain. And then the parietal part here is what that's illustrating, and through the computer is how actually, there's a bridge between the emotional and the logical, rational part, which, so that when things happen, we can create a story about what's happening. So, when emotional things happen, once, this bridge is being built between the logical, rational and emotional part of the brain, then when emotional things happen, we can go, oh, okay, I know actually that that person didn't, not want to spend time with me because they don't like me. It was actually because, they had other stuff going on in their lives. So we can form a narrative that helps us, make sense of what's happening and what's happening emotionally. and then those things get stored in the computer, so that we can come back to them. If you're interested, though, in terms of then when people experience trauma, and there's a whole workshop on trauma, so because actually this bridge between the logical, rational part of the brain and the emotional part is, often severed if there's trauma. So then people struggle to be able to make the narrative around what's happening emotionally, and therefore are more, kind of stuck in this emotional place because they can't make sense of it, logically, and therefore can't form a narrative around it. But like I say, there's a whole workshop on that in terms of an introduction to trauma. Part 1 really talks about that in terms of the brain. So when someone becomes anxious, and I have to say there's lots of wonderful videos, for children. If you just Google explaining to children the brain and anxiety, there's wonderful videos. Like Pixar have made a lot of videos as well, just really helping children in children-friendly language understand what's happening for them. So there'll be something, like I say, that feels threatening. It will trigger the emotional part of the brain, which is the amygdala, which we talked about in the quiz. The alarm system then goes off, and then they start experiencing, an increase in their pupils dilating, sweaty hands, feeling sick, feeling like you need to go to the toilet. And all these things are happening in the body in order to prepare the body for the fight or flight response. And obviously, though, what you have in front of you then is a very distressed child, because this part, the little girl here that's smiling, she's away because the frontal lobe has shut down. So because the chimp knocks out the frontal lobe, so there's not enough capacity in the brain when the alarm system goes off, to kind of be able to think rationally and logically, because, like I say, it shuts down. Hence why when you go into an exam, for example, and you all of a sudden feel like you don't know the answers or you don't know the information. I certainly had that in my A-level psychology. All of a sudden, the information is just gone. And that's because this frontal lobe is shut down. So then what we're working to do is to calm our inner chimp. And like I say, it's quite a lovely way of then explaining to children, what's happening, the chimp's taken over, and then how we can think with them about what the chimp needs when they're particularly stressed, in terms of supporting them to calm down. So I hope that makes sense for you. So then, in terms of trying to understand what's happening in terms of the school avoidance, it can be really helpful to just, kind of think through what's happening during the day at school, and then getting the child or young person, to kind of assess how they're feeling in terms of each aspect of the day. And then that might give you a sense then of where the triggers are, and what it is that they're finding particularly stressful about going to school. And then, of course, isn't it, then we can put a plan in place. And again, this is a really nice, accessible way for children to, kind of be able to share with you how they're feeling, and rate their emotions, throughout the school day, in order to then get a sense of what's happening and where the threat is. Using social stories and visual cues, particularly for children who are vulnerable or particularly anxious, it's just such a great way of helping these children really express how they feel. Images are a really safe way of communicating, and then they're a really useful way as well of introducing guidelines that then, help them have that structure in their life, and then therefore reducing the anxiety because it's taking away the uncertainty. And like I've just said there, so helps the child understand what's going to be expected of them. When things, this is going to happen now, then this is going to happen next. And then, like I say, kind of takes away that uncertainty, and therefore kind of really supports, kind of diluting the anxiety. And again, can just be, like you can use this to kind of plan out the morning. So this is, and using images as well, around just getting up in the morning, getting out of bed, having breakfast, this is going to happen then we're going to get dressed, then we're going to put our shoes on. And obviously making sure that the child is really part of that as well, so that they're not being dictated to, because then obviously then they're going to feel like they've got some autonomy over what's happening. And, for our really vulnerable children, or, perhaps children who are experiencing autism, those sort of things can be really, really valuable for them too. These resources are great, and you can download them from the Child Therapy Service website. So, and the address for that, I believe, is on the next slide. Yes. So these resources can be downloaded from www.childtherapyservice.org.uk, and Tracy's very committed to, just increasing access to these sort of resources, so they're very, very cheap, so that schools can access them. And as you can see here, isn't it, it's just making it just lovely visual ways of just highlighting, what's going to happen, and what children need to do. And this is, very current in terms of the global pandemic. Because as we all know, isn't it, when we know what's happening, then that takes away, and we know what is expected of us, that then really significantly can reduce, demystifies the fear, and then reduces the anxiety. And like I say, these sort of images as well are included in Tracy's packs, and they're really, really reasonable. Then you've got some, some questions here, and again, isn't it, you can tweak these and change these, depending on what aspect of anxiety or what the situation is with the young person, and just having some questions in advance. Just how are you feeling about going to school? What is it about, school that feels really difficult? When you imagine going to school in your body, where do you feel it in your body? What is it that feels challenging? Is there a particular part of the day that feels stressful? And for example, the part of you often help children see that they've got different parts in them. And often when there is a genuine anxiety, they will also have a part of them that they do want to go to school and learn. So, it's then helping them separate. So it's like, oh, I can hear that there's a part of you that does want to go to school and does want to learn and do well. And also then it seems that there's this other part that doesn't want to go. And so then it's like teasing, trying to tease that out. And we'll think a bit more about how we can do that further down the line. So these visual timetables are great, like I say, for really anxious children, so it's like, this is the timetable for Monday, we're going to do this in the morning, then we're going to do this at break time, or after break, sorry, just really breaks down the day. And if, obviously, isn't it, this is what's happening at home at the moment, everybody predominantly is homeschooling, yet if the child is coming into school, then these visual timetables can be sent home in advance, again, to try and reduce that anxiety. So then, like we were saying, in terms of the brain, what we want to do is try and help children, initially feel calm, and teaching them, some grounding techniques. And again, I'm all about finding resources that are out there and that I can take advantage of, rather than creating, my own resources, or our own resources at Boingboing. If it's already there, then I'm happy to use it. And Clara at veryspecialtales.com has got some great grounding techniques that you can use with children, where, there's lots of different grounding techniques where you can pretend that you're different animals. Like say, if they're going on all fours, being a lion, taking a deep breath in for 3, holding it for 3, and then roaring it out. And there's lots of, pretending to be a crocodile, in terms of, that body, like full body relaxation, just pretending to be a cat with the yoga pose. Just great ideas. So check that out as well, because there's lots of different grounding techniques that are on offer there. Things like bubbles can be really great, just a nice way of teaching children, just in terms of the importance of the breath. So we talked about that before, in terms of then what breathing provides the body and the brain. Doing things like star jumps, is another great grounding technique, and lots of fun as well. Or, just teaching the full body relaxation. So lying on the ground, starting, at the bottom of your body with your toes, kind of really clenching them, and then moving all the way up to the head. And again, you can find full body relaxation scripts for children on the web, and I think there's even some at Clara's website as well, so that are really useful. And children engage with them as well, because they like to feel like they're doing something. So they're really engaging. So I talked a bit before about the importance of connecting, with how people are feeling, and then important, to provide that logical, rational information afterwards. And this helps then build the bridge between the emotional and logical parts of the brain. Because remember, children, isn't it, they're all emotional brain. So actually what they need from us is to be their frontal lobes, as well as helping them make sense of their emotions, but also as well as really connecting in with how they're feeling and really validating that. It can feel so tempting, I think, in the morning, isn't it, if it's stressful, and you're, as a parent, you're wanting, to get out the door, that it's very tempting to think it will just be fine. You go to school every day, it's going to be fine. Whereas actually, if you're feeling that school is threatening in some way, then it feels the opposite of fine. And then what happens is, if we're criticised when we're feeling anxious, or if we sort of feel like we're dismissed, then what that does is it escalates that fight or flight response, because it feels stressful. So then the increased stress escalates, like I say, the emotional response in the brain. So that's why, isn't it? I don't know if you've ever, been distressed, and then if you get critical with yourself, then, like I say, that can compound that feeling, because it adds to the stress. You're already feeling distressed, and we tell ourselves off, and then the feeling escalates. So that's also then how it feels for the other person. So these are just some suggestions. If you've got a child or young person who's concerned about going to school, it's like, oh, I can see it feels really tough to even imagine going to school right now. And I really understand that, given how things have been for you, that of course, you feel concerned about going. Gosh, you're so frightened. What do you need from me right now? And then, of course, isn't it, you know, trying to stay calm and, you know, connect physically by, you know, either stroking, if that's, you know, if that's appropriate, or just really soothing with the tone of the voice. And then, you know, it's about getting a sense of, you know, if that person is, you know, at a 10 in terms of their anxiety, you know, just trying to measure when it feels appropriate to then go in with the logical information. As like I said, you don't want to go in too soon because that could then feel dismissive. Like I was saying before, don't worry, you know, when you get there, you'll be fine. Because, you know, if we do that too soon, then it's going to bring the anxiety up again. Because the part of us that feels anxious then doesn't feel understood, doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel acknowledged. And then, like I say, it ends up feeling considerably more stressful. And then these are, you know, just some redirect suggestions. So you feel like the person, you know, has perhaps come down, you know, to about a 4 in terms of their anxiety. You know, they're kind of looking at you, you know, and a good way actually, you know, of kind of helping people connect is to say their name, you know. So, you know, Johnny, I can see that it feels really tough for you right now to even imagine going to school. Or, you know, Johnny, I really get how frightened you are. Because what you're doing when you're saying their name is you're trying to bring them back into the present and engage that frontal lobe. So that's why that helps. So these are, you know, so just some redirect options. So do you remember that morning when things went well, and just provide examples? Because then what you're doing is you're connecting with your feeling, and also then you're also giving those examples of when, you know, there's been evidence that things have gone okay before. So then, you know, if we do it in that way, then the person is able to hold the both, rather than, you know, this kind of black and white thinking that we can get into when we're anxious, that it's all going to be awful. It's like, oh, okay, I get that a part of you feels, you know, that it's all going to be awful. And when the timing's right, like I say, it's like, oh, and also, isn't it, there was that time when, you know, things were okay, and you know, you actually ended up having a really nice morning. And but yeah, like I say, it's all about timing when we're coming in with the redirect. This is your Mr. Worry part, or whatever you might name it. I'm going to talk a little bit about labelling parts of us in a second. You know, frightening you into going again, or like I mentioned earlier about the chimp. So, oh, it's like Mr. Chimp is taking over, and he's got scared. And often I give a chimp to children that I work with, because then that really encourages that physical looking after. So then they're tasked with taking the chimp home, looking after them, and then giving them what they need when they feel frightened. This time of day is always the hardest, and we know from experience that it will get better. If things become too overwhelming, then we'll take you to your safe place in the school and give you what you need. This is what you have on today. What here are you most afraid of? So again, you know, with this question, isn't it? It's like you're really acknowledging, you know, that they're frightened, and also you want to put a plan in place to really support them. So yeah, like I say, so we're all, you know, we all grow up, and we all, you know, kind of then develop different parts in us. You know, we have a part of us that feels like we need to be, we might have parts in us that feel like we're not good enough, or we might have parts in us that feel like we need to try harder in life, or we might have a good girl part or a good boy part. We might have a rule breaker part. So you'll know all, you know, your own parts. And then if there's a school avoidance issue, isn't it, then there's a part that is afraid of going to school. And actually the great thing then about calling it a part is that it means that then the child is able to be separate from it as well. So because it's not all of them. And then, like I said earlier, it kind of brings in the possibility then of going, oh, okay, I can see that there's another part in you that is also keen to learn, keen to do well at school, there's a part that really likes your friends and has a nice time. So, and then it just, like I say, it just helps with that separation and being able to hold that we've got, we have different parts that feel different things. So then a really good question, that can start to get to the core fear is the part of you that doesn't want to go to school. What is that part afraid will happen to you? And it's like if the child says something like, "Oh, I'm worried, that people will judge me," and it's like, "Oh, what if people judge you? What's that part afraid will happen to you then?" Well, then I won't feel very good about myself, and it's like, "Oh, okay." So then it's like that that illustrates, isn't it, where the work needs to be, and it's like then also what would that part of you need in order to feel safe, and what do we need to put in place during the school day in order to feel safe. So with that first question, it's really trying to chunk down until you get to the real core fear. I feel overwhelmed. Okay, and then what's that part afraid will happen if you feel overwhelmed? And until you feel, and often we know we've got to the core fear if the same response is being repeated. So then, and like I say, of course, we've talked about how important it is to really acknowledge this anxiety, because the thing as well about when we're feeling anything, if we feel like somebody's trying to take that feeling away from us, then we do tend to just hold on to it much more. So we've really acknowledged the anxiety, and then it's also about, on the other side of that, trying to really build the brave. So tell me about a time when you were brave, and it's like I'm really acknowledging, like, so they'll tell you a story about when they did something that was really brave, and it's important to just really acknowledge that. And it's like, wow, you've done so much, you have so much brave in you already, because when the amygdala is taking over, it's hard to believe in those moments that we can be brave. So reminding them that we all have the capacity to be brave. So it's really reminding children that that's there in them. But like I say, we don't want to do that to discount the feeling. We want to do it and also, so, and then getting them to try and locate, that brave part. So where do you feel the brave part in your body? How do you know when you're being brave? And then starting to try and make a relationship between the two. So how can the brave part look after the part of you that's afraid? Or how can the brave part look after that chimp inside you that gets so scared? So, and yeah, just another, just coming back to this really. So, obviously it can be really hard for children, to identify how they are feeling and, when they're in these particular zones. So the zones of regulation is just a great way, and you've got the use of the Pixar characters from that great film Inside Out. So, and just helping them understand, what else is happening when they're in these different zones. So, but, when they're in a kind of anxious place, which is this yellow place here, that they're also feeling a bit out of control and, kind of wobbly in their tummy. And, so you can get them to really map out, from a body perspective as well, where they feel it. So that they've just got so much information and you're increasing their awareness all the time about how they're feeling, and then what they need, and then doing some work around this part as well. So because ultimately, isn't it, if we're in the blue or in the yellow or in the red, it's like how can we what helps us be here. So what helps us be in the green zone. And I think this is great as well to have as a whole school example, so having it in the classroom, so children, get to kind of just, take a sticker perhaps and just, rate where they are that day. So they get really familiar as well with using the zones of regulation. And then as a teacher, you get a sense of where everyone is in the morning and what they need in order to, like I say, kind of be here. But again, isn't it? It's just being really aware that it isn't about trying to, very quickly move people from here to here. And actually, we won't do that unless we really acknowledge where people are first. So really connecting with their feelings. Oh, excuse me. So it's so important if there is a child or young person that's worried about going to school, in terms of the planning, and have it might not necessarily need to be a meeting, because they're not ideal necessarily for children or young people. Yet in some way, shape or form, the young person needs to be involved in terms of the plan. Whatever plan you're going to put in place to support them to engage with school, because if they're not involved, then it's just not going to work, because it's not on their terms ultimately, and they haven't had their say, or there's no autonomy on their part. So it's crucial that they are involved. It's really important in my experience that everyone in the school is aware of the plan too. So say, for example, there's nothing more distressing if you've got a young woman, for example, that's been able to come into school later because of her school anxiety, and then she turns up for history, and then she's shut down because she's arrived late, or so again, just an example of how important it is that everyone is aware of the plan. Have regular check-ins to see how the plan is going. So if somebody's particularly anxious, then it may be that you check in on a daily basis to begin with each other, that there's some key people in terms of taking the plan forward that are checking out how things are going. And then, yes, my experience of working with this issue as well is traditional ways of doing things maybe needing to be temporarily relinquished. So you might have a hope that the child is at school between 9 and 3, yet that may be too ambitious. Or as a parent, you might have a hope that your child eats a good breakfast in the morning, and then there may be times when, going via McDonald's on the way to school provides a sweet incentive. So it's just, my experience of working with this issue and working with parents and working with schools is that actually sometimes we, like I say, we just have to give things up, give in a bit in support of, just being flexible. And I guess ultimately, isn't it, letting the child know that we get how hard it is, and we're on their side. So then, of course, isn't it, if you've got a plan in place, it's really important, that that's evaluated, so whatever the plan was, whatever the activity was, whether that's going in on a side entrance or going in later, or just having, half an hour a day, or and then, like I say, just making sure that you kind of help the child to kind of rate, how did that help, what were the challenges with it, and if there's any way it needs changing or rectifying in the future. So these are just some tips that we've put together, just in terms of, like I say, the learning around trying to deal with this issue. So as much as possible, isn't it? I know every day with this is going to be a challenge, and the danger is, isn't it, we can really get into, oh God, yesterday was so awful, so therefore tomorrow is going to be exactly the same. And it's just really practicing, just trying to stay in the here and now. Today is another day, and we'll just see how it goes and take it moment by moment, because those mornings, particularly, well, if it is the mornings, often it's the mornings with school anxiety, can be very, very stressful. So it's just taking it a moment at a time, knowing what you need, if you're a parent watching this, or knowing what you need as a teacher if you're watching this, and also then, isn't it, most importantly, knowing what the child needs during those tricky times in order to to kind of make it through. Lots and lots of compassion for yourself, for the child, for everyone involved. This is a really tricky issue because of the legality around needing to get children to school as well. So it's really, really tough. So if you are a parent, or if you're a teacher, and you've got a particular tricky issue around this that you're dealing with, just enlisting lots of support as well. Someone that you can go to that really gets it, that also, is kind of, you've got a big open heart and will, listen and be there, because that's just really, really crucial. Trying to be really curious, particularly, when you're talking to the child about this. Their feelings are valid. You might not agree with them, and it may have felt like things happen differently for you, particularly if you're the teacher, or and also it is how they're feeling. So and like I say, to criticize, we only end up then increasing the distress. So as much as possible, trying to be curious rather than, and also with ourselves, if you're a parent and pulling your hair out over this issue, of course, totally understandable. And if you have a bad morning, it's like, try and approach that from that curious place in you, like, what happened there, why was it so tough, and and what might you be able to do next time, isn't it? And from a curious place about what you might be able to do next time, not from a critical place. Like I say, this situation is tough enough as it is, without then adding on that additional stress. Sometimes it can be really helpful, actually, to just really accept. Acceptance is really powerful. Accept that it's going to be challenging. Accept that it's hard work. It's hard work for everybody involved, because then when we accept and we give in to that, then we take out the fight. Whereas actually, if we've got a part of us that knows that it is how it is with this situation, yet another part that's going, yes, but it should be different, then obviously it creates that battle inside, and it's like a tug of war, if you like. So actually, knowing, isn't it, like I say, trying to accept, okay, Johnny might not be going to school full time at the moment, we're going to have to take this slow, and just take, isn't it, from, even if he's in school only for a couple of hours, that's that's great, that's better than you might have hoped for. Every feeling that you have is valid, whether you're a teacher, parent, child in this. They don't necessarily always, like I say, kind of correspond, yet everyone has their own perspective, and it's important that everyone perspective is heard as well. Then thinking about conserving, so thinking about what, is there anything that's happened in the past that's worked really well, that you might want to kind of draw on again, kind of from the child's perspective, even, like I say, even if that is chocolate cake for breakfast in the morning, just kind of trying to then see what's worked well in the past, and is there anything that's worth preserving for the future. It is an emotional roller coaster in terms of this situation, and it's important for everyone, I think, to try not to expect too much of yourself as well as others, and actually that sometimes a step back can also mean a step forward. Sometimes we have to go back in order to go forward, and as long as there's some learning that can be acquired from going back, then actually it's always really, really useful. And yeah, wherever possible, isn't it, supporting parents too to manage their own anxiety, because they'll be feeling an enormous amount of pressure from the system, you know, an enormous amount of pressure in terms of the legal frame, you know. So wherever possible, if you're doing any work around anxiety, any workshops or anything, then it's also really, really crucial to include parents in that and helping them to, you know, the more supportive you can be from a school perspective, it can really, really help parents. So just take a minute to breathe. There's a lot of information that I've just shared with you there. So, you know, perhaps just go back over those tips and just have a think. What might you need most at the moment? What's have you got a situation that you're working with that's, you know, dealing with this and it's particularly tricky? Is it going to help you to stay in the here and now? You know, to try and practice that. And again, don't forget, isn't it? It's hard to do that. You know, our brains are designed to look out for threat. So, you know, we can practice staying in the now, and then the brain will go, oh, but what about that? So, and then the skill is to go, okay, I've just noticed that, you know, and then just going to try and bring it back to the here and now. The tip you might most need is to, you know, to validate your own emotions, to really let some of that anger out. You know, if it's been really, really stressful, you've had a really, really tough time, you know, to if you're able to go out at the moment, go and do some screaming meditation, you know, just bend down and give yourself a good rah. You know, this is really tough from whatever angle you're coming from or whatever role or position you're in. You know, so like I say, isn't it, we've been talking about connecting with our feelings all the way along, and it's so important, whichever role we're in around this. It's not just about connecting with the child's feelings. You know, as a parent, your feelings are valid and need connecting with too. And as a teacher, you know, involved in this, you know, you'll have your own perspective, and you know, that's really valid as well. So yeah, so just you might just need a good old rah. And you know, if there's someone that you can go to enlist some support around that, then brilliant. So then here are just some you know, whole school approach ideas that I've also used in the past with people, you know, in terms of supporting this sort of piece of work. So obviously, you know, it's really important if you're getting together, you know, to make a plan around this, that there's regular meetings in place for everyone. You know, maybe there's room for a sort of a parent mentor scheme, so other parents that have gone through, you know, I know this happens ad hoc, that parents who have struggled with this issue find each other, which is great, but you know, perhaps there's an opportunity for something to be set up specifically. And also then, isn't it, if children have gone through this, you know, maybe there's also room to, you know, to help children be mentors, you know, for other children, and help them, you know, through that, through those difficulties and through those anxieties. You could run worry campaigns around the school. There's a health promotion calendar that details anxiety weeks, or, you know, so it's really great to kind of connect in with that, and then making perhaps, you know, worrying about going to school as a specific issue, because just because it's not talked about doesn't mean to say it's not there. And then often, isn't it, if we talk about these things, then it creates that space for people to really share how they're feeling. Making sure that you've got anonymous feedback systems within the school, so that people can, like say, kind of comment and share, you know, how they're feeling about particular issues, or to raise issues that might not have been raised before. Running workshops for parents on anxiety and worry. And actually, if you've watched the workshop on working with marginalised parents, I'd recommend that if you're going to run a workshop on anxiety and worry, you know, make it child-led, because, you know, it's actually, as much as the tide is changing around mental health, it's still, you know, kind of there'd be lots of shame potentially around a parent pitching up and acknowledging that they, you know, that they too might also be anxious or concerned. Making sure, like I say, that you've got those traffic light systems and the zones of regulation in the classroom so that children get familiar, you know, with in terms of identifying how they're feeling. The use of assemblies for raising issues such as these. And then also, yeah, like I've been saying throughout, really, approaches that support access, you know, so side doors, late entrances, reduced timetables, etc. If being visible or, you know, kind of, well, being visible, yeah, and worrying about seeing people in the playground or worrying about seeing people on the way into school, or if there's a social anxiety, late entrances and side doors, etc., can really help with those things. Making sure that children and young people have access to groups and clubs outside of school. I worked with a young man who did have, you know, significant school anxiety, and actually his motocross and, you know, judo and things like that were just really, really crucial in terms of then giving him an outlet. And also then not only an outlet, but also, you know, continuing to build relationships and build his confidence and, you know, outside of school and in the absence of that being able to happen at school. Running sort of tutor group sessions on this particular issue, like I say, so that it's out there, it's open, you know, and then also getting ideas from the children and young people about how they feel as a school that you can support this issue. Obviously, transition is really key, like the stats say, isn't it? This is a particular issue for children between 5 and 6 and 10 and 11, you know, so, and they're sort of key transition times. So, and we have also produced an online video on supporting people through transition. So it might be worth having a look at that. And then also just have a think yourself if you've got any other ideas, and also, you know, great if you can drop us an email and let us know what those ideas are. It'd be great to hear from you. And yeah, I love this. So, isn't it, you know, like I say, you might have to do things differently at first, and it might feel, oh gosh, you know, Alfie's gone from a full-time table to, you know, just going in a few hours a week. But actually, you know, if it needs to go slower, then actually just going at that pace, you know, will feel safe, and then might result in things actually progressing much quicker than if we try and force them, you know, isn't it? If we place pressure and we try and force, that's all that's going to happen. It's going to create resistance. And what's the saying? Is it the hare? Well, the hare and the tortoise won the race. So these are some resources, you know, that are really, really valuable that I've used, that are great to use with children and parents. The Invisible String is a lovely, lovely book that helps show children that even if you're not together, that you're still connected. And the I haven't read The Kissing Hand, but I've heard it's very, very good in terms of this particular issue. Hey Awesome by Karen Sigmund is a lovely, lovely book, and what it does throughout is just really reframes those qualities of anxiety into really positive traits. And then Karen has also got another book in the series. So if you go to buy it, obviously it'll probably come up because I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head. But that also then explains in really child-friendly language about the brain as well, and how the brain responds in terms of anxiety. So, and Karen has got a Facebook page and a Instagram page, and, you know, often is presenting videos and on anxiety, and does lots of work around building the brave, empowering young people to recognize how brave they are. And yeah, fantastic, really, really great resource. So I definitely recommend Hey Awesome. And it's really escaping me what the other title of the other book is. So, but if you Google Karen Young, then it will come up. Okay, so that's it for this session. So, and obviously we've got tons of resources on the Boingboing website, because there's a few websites I've mentioned today, but I haven't quite mentioned our own yet. So you can go to www.boingboing.org.uk, and there's lots of resources there. There's a mental health in schools guide that also then has lots of ideas in terms of working with anxiety from a whole school approach as well. There's a resilient classroom that's got lots of ideas in terms of how you can work with anxiety in terms of, and then working alongside the resilience framework as well. So yes, I hope today has been useful for you, and I'm sure there's a lot of information there, so you've taken in a lot of information. And the great thing about this, isn't it, is that you can watch this over and over again. It's sad that we can't be together in person in terms of training right now. Yeah, this is the next best thing. So I hope that's helpful, and stay safe and take care.